Is Oregon going to haunt USC all the way to the Big Ten? Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by here. Of course, comments and questions, leave those in the chat. Welcome in and kick back for the next 60 with Matt Zemek and myself breaking down USC football here on Trojan Conquest Live. Of course, join Matt leading into the season. Matt and Tim there on Trojan's Wire every day. Matt, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing okay. And for those who are tuning in, well, you can see it's just Mark and myself tonight. You know, Tim's school season is just starting, so he has a lot of transitions to make. Just everything kind of piled up on him today. Just he had to take a 1-day break. So Tim's fine. It's just like school starting, so he needs to just get a few things in order. He and I will be around for our Friday night call-in show here at the Voice of College Football. So Tim's fine, just needs a day to collect and gather himself, as one could reasonably expect of anyone in the teaching profession. So, Mark, I think the item to lead with today, last week it was the coaches poll. Today it's the AP poll. And USC 23rd in both polls. And beyond the fact that USC gets buried at the bottom of each poll, and we talked last week about LSU being 11 spots better in the coaches poll, here in the AP poll 10 spots better. We've already litigated that. Like, USC and LSU are fundamentally in the same position on so many levels. Both losing a Heisman quarterback, both having an awful defense last year, both having to completely revamp their defensive staffs, and yet people think that LSU is just magically 10, 11 spots better. We already litigated that. But I think the bigger point, as you look at these polls side to side, like, this is an exercise in groupthink. Like,
yes, thank you.
Are the writers just saying, well, okay, that's what the coaches did, I guess we could just, mail it in and do pretty much the same thing? I mean, what? Like, come on. Like, all the coaches and all the writers don't have any, like, more than 2 or 3 spots of deviation for any of the teams in the country. I mean, okay, so Kansas 22-24, and let's see, NC State 22-24. But my golly, there's so many identical votes. Like Oklahoma 16, Tennessee 15. Like the writers and coaches all think that Clemson's the 14th best team in the country instead of 18 or 19. I mean, this is hilarious. Like, there's no differing opinion on anybody. Like, what the hell?
Matt, do you happen to see the title of my latest video released after the AP poll was released? I'm right there with you.
Bingo. I will definitely have a listen.
So
I will also promote that on Trojan's Wire too.
We appreciate that. Because here's the deal. Just imagine, Tim, and my apologies, everyone. I was trying to switch back to the poll itself. Imagine, let's say we lived in a world in which we all had our independent research and investigation of the teams throughout the offseason. Let's say there was no social media. There was no sharing of any ideas. We all just got rosters and transfer portal news, and we had to independently decide, how good are these teams? How good were they last year? Were some of them a little bit lucky? Some of them less fortunate? What did they add? What did they subtract? And come to our own conclusions. It is impossible that there would be this much consensus on these are the very best teams in the country. Then these are the next 5 or 6. Then these are the next group. And then we've got this tier down here, that there would be this much consensus. I predicted this the other day, and I did not have to be any kind of college football savant to do it when we were talking about the AP poll a few days ago, when some viewers, one in particular, asked me, why don't you predict the AP poll? And I said, it's been predicted for me. The coaches poll came out last week, and everybody's going to be exactly the same, or they're going to be off by 1 spot. And that proved to be true up until that huge gap of difference of opinion between Kansas and NC State right at the bottom of the poll by 2 spots.
Wow, it's just extraordinary. I mean, And one other point that we discussed a week ago was, Miami being 4 spots ahead of USC despite Mario Cristobal not being able to coach his way out of a wet paper bag. In both polls, both polls think Mario Cristobal is, and look, it's not even just above USC, it's 4 places. Come on, it really does tell me that people are just mailing it in, and they're basically just going by what everyone else in the room thinks. Okay, if you're bullish on Mario Cristobal, maybe you have Miami at 15, or if you're a skeptic of Miami, you have the Hurricanes at 24. But they're exactly 4 spots ahead. Now, I'm not saying this is rigged or anything. I'm not talking about that. This is just groupthink. This is just a bunch of lemmings. That is just, and it does underscore the point, Mark, that because these are such a bunch of lemmings, and because there is such groupthink here, these polls aren't worth, a warm bucket of spit. These are just people either flinging stuff against a wall with teams 11 through 25, and then 1 through 10 is based on reputation and brand name. I think there are 2 different kind of segments. Top half is mostly well, they were good last year, and then the second half is just playing hunches or going by some group consensus. So and that should make USC fans feel better. That first off, USC is being disrespected, but second, USC is being disrespected in a way that I don't see a lot of intellectual vigor. And third, there is this process of manifest, obvious groupthink. So again, USC gets the free motivation of being disrespected, but I don't see a lot of intellectual heavy lifting here at all. And that should also calm USC fans. They should not look at these polls. USC fans should not look at these polls and say, oh, I should really give credence to these rankings because, gosh, these voters really took a lot of time and care, and they really did arrive at their own independent conclusions. Wink, wink. So I think USC fans will say, yeah, these rankings are not worth getting worked up about. But I sure hope that Lincoln Riley and his staff are just going to plaster these rankings on the wall and say, hey guys, they have Kansas ranked ahead of you. Hey guys, they have Arizona and Mario Cristobal and Oklahoma State and Kansas State ranked ahead of you. If you want to make a statement, it's up to you, boys. You got to do it against LSU. But free motivation for the Trojans.
So, folks, take in those 25, and then history will tell us, recent history, take 11 of those. Figure out which 11, because you are not going to see them in the final top 25. They will miss on 11 or 12 of those 25. They will be gone. So consider that. Also, Matt, what I find interesting, and maybe this is just me and me alone that has a bit of an irritation when it comes to this. Those teams down at the bottom, they are just as much part of this poll as the other 25. They are still, there is nothing different about the process or the casting of votes that is different in the listing of those other teams. There is just a choice to just list 25 teams. There should be a 26 next to Louisville, a 27 next to Virginia Tech, and 28 next to Boise State. There's no difference in the process that produced. They just stopped listing teams at 25.
It's a really good point that, the top 25 is what we've become accustomed to, but yeah, why can't you rank teams 26 through 40? Yeah, I completely agree. After all, there are nearly 130 teams in the FBS. We should just be, we should be ranking them numerically all the way through. And Mark, before you add another point, we do this in college basketball, right? What's a top 50 win, a top 100 win, a top 200 win, a top 300 win? Why? We don't have that methodology in college football. But hey, like, wouldn't that be clarifying and helpful? This was a top 100 win. This was a top 75 win. Like, we should be doing that, but we don't, because it's just being lazy and stopping short of a complete measurement. All right, you were about to chime in.
Man, I'm sure I've mentioned this to you in the past, and it drove people crazy, but I did it twice intentionally just for that intended result. And I produced, I believe it was 37 one week. I did the top 30. This is my top 37. And people were like, what are you doing? What's that even? That's terrible. That's crazy. What are you doing? It's just another number to be used. There's nothing special or magical about it being 25. There is nothing in that number 26 ranking that separates them from the other 25 any more than they actually, in both polls, Louisville and Washington at 26 are closer to 25 than Iowa is to the team at number 24 in regards to the numbers of, like, these teams don't fall off a cliff at 26 and just become completely irrelevant, incapable, pathetic football teams.
Absolutely. You look at the coaches poll, or at least each of these two polls. Like, Louisville is pretty solidly a top 27 team. Virginia Tech is a top 28 team. But then how it tails off from there. There are a lot more others receiving votes in one of the polls as compared to the other. That's kind of an interesting little story.
It's the coaches poll on the right.
Yeah, so it's interesting how, like, you have almost double the amount of others receiving votes in the coaches poll, and that tells me those are the coaches of the teams, right? I mean, it would almost have to be. Whereas the writers don't feel as beholden to kind of put their own team's name in the hopper. I see Colorado with 2 votes. It would be interesting to find the non-Deion Sanders vote there on the right hand side. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, yeah, for people to get worked up about you doing a top 37 as though it's kind of an affront to college football tradition, or it's trying to mess with people's minds. Wait a minute, there are 130 teams. Shouldn't we be ranking all of them, right? Shouldn't we be measuring their quality every week?
That's going to be my next
based
point.
on how results change, and when you measure strength of schedule especially at the end of the season. Like, at the beginning of the season, you don't know who's good and who's not. You don't know how good a win is going to be. There's always that ship-shifting game in week 2 or week 3 where it seems to mean one thing, and then 2 months later it means something entirely different. Like, you think it's a commentary on the winner. 2 months later, you realize, oh, the loser was much, much, much worse than we all suspected. But, like, in mid-November, you want to know how good every team is. Like, if one team has 3 wins against teams outside the top 75, and another team has no wins outside the top 75 and all of its wins inside the top 50, well, like, that's a pretty significant difference in terms of 2 teams with similar records vying for one of those final college football playoff at-large bids. So, like, why wouldn't you rank every team? Why would you stop at 25 as though that's somehow sacred? It is just easy. Well, it's easy. It is easy to go into groupthink, but it is still kind of shocking how buffaloed people get when you just make the slightest change to a long-standing method or practice. Oh, I'm going to rank a few more teams outside the top 25, and people, what sacrilege? How dare you? Wait, what? Tell me, who died? Who got harmed in this process? What principle is being violated? Hello.
Yeah, I didn't even remember the arguments being sacrilege. Like, okay, this is a time-honored tradition, of course, that, for you younger fans, it only goes back to 1989, by the way. It's not some type of 100-year tradition to rank 25 teams. It was a top 20 until 1989. So it's not that long of a standing tradition that it has to be 25 teams, because it was 20. And there was an 8-year time period for one of the two polls during the 1960s in which it was only a top 10. They actually reduced it from 20 to 10 for 8 seasons, and then came back to a top 20 in the late 60s. So there is nothing magical about 25 teams. It's like, I remember one time having an argument with somebody about Mike Mussina, had won 19 games, like 8 or 9 seasons in a row. But there was something, he wasn't as good as, because he didn't win 20 games. Okay, you understand that that's only a 1-game difference. Just like if we said, well, we're just going to give honor and acknowledge the 21-game winners. Like, it's just another win. It just happens to be an even number. There's nothing magical about it. And the same thing here. All the teams should be ranked. If we're going to rank 1 team or 3 teams or 25 teams, we should rank all the teams.
No question about it. So it's really, you are the pioneer, not just of the top 25 rankings that make sense, but really just every college football ranking that makes sense. So that is well worth carrying forward for the rest of the season. Now, Mark, as we shift gears a little bit, one story that came across the wires, not too long before our show, this was about 2 hours ago, USC and Doug Belk flipped UCF 4-star safety Kendarius Riddick. So, Doug Belk getting some work done, and this comes just a few hours after some other recruiting battles, for USC on Monday. But it's a definite sign that the reputation of this defensive coaching staff is not only like it's getting noticed, but more specifically, it continues to get noticed in the Deep South. I mean, and this has been a recurring theme that USC, instead of being gun shy after some of the flips, the decommits from USC, back to Georgia, USC could have gotten gun shy, but no, USC is going back into the belly of the beast, back into the state of Georgia, in this case, back into the state of Florida, and is continuing to recruit very vigorously in SEC country. Also, Cardi Smith, that was on the offensive line, but nevertheless, former Auburn commit. So like USC going into the South, and in this case, on the defensive side of the ball, it is an indication that, this new staff has a reputation that's getting noticed, and it's getting noticed, well outside the Western United States. So definitely a feather in Doug Belk's cap as he builds his future USC secondary.
These are some impressive rankings here that I believe this week I'm allowed to recite because Tim's not here. 14th rated safety in the country, 27th rated out of the state of Georgia, according to the 247 rankings. The composite, pretty much in line with the same type ranking, a top 15 safety in the country, in that range, certainly. And again, out of the state of Georgia. It's quite the back and forth that USC is having with SEC schools battling for players out of the Peach State.
And it is reflective of the mentality that USC has here. And let's keep in mind, just as a little bit of perspective, for those who've been, longtime USC fans, those who followed the program for several years, let's remember Clancy Pendergast, Clay Helton's defensive coordinator. First off, he wasn't a very good defensive coordinator. But secondly, Clancy Pendergast didn't recruit. He basically begged off the recruiting trail. And, it's one thing to have a situation such as what you have at Ohio State, right? Because Chip Kelly, he's older and he felt, exhausted by head coaching, just wants to call plays, just wants to scheme it up. Like, you have plenty of heavy hitters in recruiting on that Ohio State staff, such that you don't have to have Chip Kelly on the recruiting trail. Like, Ryan Day can recruit quarterbacks, and Brian Hartline can recruit wide receivers, and you have people in their various positions on that staff who can bring in the elite skill possession talent, and you can just have Chip Kelly. You can just set him aside and say, "Hey, Chip, you just call our plays. You design our offense. Do what you do best." That's one thing. But Clancy Pendergast was not very good as a coordinator in general, and he didn't recruit. So like that was such a nothing burger, a zero value reality for Clay Helton. And then so you look at this now, and it's like manna from heaven, right? It's water in the desert. Water in Death Valley on a 120-degree day. This is exactly what USC fans have been longing to get. And the cherry on top of all this is that Dante Williams, he was a good recruiter, but he didn't have the coaching chops to match. But here that not only is a four-star safety coming into the program, but that with Doug Belk and Taylor Mays, don't want to forget good old Taylor, who seems to be one of the rising young stars in the coaching industry, and someone that USC definitely needs to retain in the future and keep within the program. That with Doug Belk and Taylor Mays on hand to coach Kendarius Reddick, you can feel very confident and very comfortable in the quality of player development that you're going to get here. So it's really leagues apart. It's night and day different from what we've had in previous years here at USC. So it's the caliber of player. It's going into SEC country, so from Georgia, but it was a UCF commit. So really there's kind of this is going into Georgia and Florida, really. You could credit this as a pull from both states. And it's a testament to what this new defensive staff is bringing to the table for future recruiting classes.
And fortunately for USC, in regards to the recruiting battles being waged currently and the news that's coming in, this Kendarius Reddick news somewhat tempers and balances out the earlier news from the day concerning Matt One Cody Green, of course, out of Modern Day at 6'6", 285, one of the very best offensive tackles in the country. Modern Day. We're talking about USC territory, choosing Oregon.
Yeah, so if our friend Tim Prangley was on the show tonight, he would be lamenting how these prospects from Southern California, from Tim's backyard, aren't being retained at the level that they need to be. And I credited Josh Henson with the Cardi Smith flip. That was some really strong, solid work, to get the decommit from Auburn, bring him in the program. But I think that USC fans would readily agree. Like even those who get on me when I play bad cop to Tim's good cop, I think they'd agree with me. Like this is precisely the kind of recruitment you need to be winning more often, right? I'm not like the world's greatest recruiting wizard or analyst, but I did see, when this story broke earlier on Monday afternoon, that this was Oregon's second highest rated offensive line commitment under Lanning, and the only one that was ranked higher, Josh Connerly. And USC fans still remember the sting of losing out on that particular recruit. And we've seen how good Connerly has been in Eugene with the Ducks. So like this is really the representative recruitment. It's that if you are operating the way you're supposed to be at USC, if you are performing in recruiting at the level you are expected to at USC, this is the kind of recruitment that you win. Maybe not all the time, but more often than not. And USC hasn't yet turned to that corner. Oregon is entering this year as a top 3, top 4 program, expected to be competing in the college football playoff semifinals. So recruits are saying that, Oregon is closer to a national championship than USC is. And right now, I think that it's hard to fault that observation. So USC is not going to turn this around instantly, but it does underscore the point that USC really does need to change the conversation this year. And, making the playoff at 10-2 would be absolutely wonderful and fantastic. But I think USC fans would agree. And again, even those who hate me for being the bad cop to Tim's good cop, I think most USC fans would agree. If the Trojans are going to begin to change the conversation, if they're going to begin to change the momentum and feel in and around the program, if they're going to begin to alter the narrative and where it lands and how it sticks, USC needs to win at least 9. You have to go at least 9-3. 8-4 is not going to do it for anybody. 7-5, of course, would be a disaster if USC replicates that in a 12-game regular season relative to 2023. USC has to win at least 9. 10-2 would be a tremendous. Sign me up right now for 10-2 if offered that deal. But USC's going to have to win at least 9 to begin to reshift how the program is perceived, to shift how USC is measured up against Oregon. Let's deal with this hypothetical. If USC finishes 9-3 and Oregon finishes 10-2 and makes the playoff, but loses either in the first round or the quarterfinals, like if that's the 2024 pair of outcomes for the two schools, I think USC would then be in a position to say, hey, Dan Lanning can't coach his way out of a wet paper bag. He had his elite recruiting classes. He had his national championship window closed. And now here we are at USC. We're the program moving up. Oregon fumbled the bag. You could use that term metaphorically if Oregon goes 10-2 this year. And USC could really say, hey, we're the program with momentum. The future is ours. The future belongs to us. Oregon had your chance. Now, I'm not predicting that Oregon's going to go 10-2. I do actually think Oregon will go 11-1. Getting Ohio State at home, I think that's a difference maker there. Obviously not sold on Ohio State's quarterback, but that's a separate issue. I'm just laying forth the hypothetical that if USC goes 9-3 and Oregon goes 10-2 and Oregon doesn't at least get to the playoff semifinals, that would change the recruiting dynamic, I would think, for this next cycle and the one after that. So for in December, some guys who maybe were committed to Oregon might reconsider flipping to USC, especially if they have Southern California roots. If that is what the outcomes are in this 2024 season. But the larger point is, it's not going to change instantly. USC has to do things on the field to begin to change the conversation. Like USC can't have another disastrous season. If USC had gone 11-1 or even 10-2 in 2023, I don't think you'd see this imbalance in recruiting between USC and Oregon. I think USC would be retaining guys from SoCal. And there are some USC critics out there who say, hey, we're not retaining enough California prospects. We don't seem to have really close relationships with the coaches at the Southern California schools. I think there's some truth there, but this is mostly about USC being 7-5 in 2023. I would like to think that is the main driver of this. And then if USC had won 10 or 11 games last year, you would not be seeing Oregon and Dan Lanning continuing to stack recruiting victories over USC. So the Trojans can do something about it. They can't really do anything about it right now in the middle of August, but the next 3.5 months, yes, they will be able to do something about it.
Yeah, when we think about which school attracts players and why they attract players and taking the money portion out of it, that is, of course, more of a factor and technically, for the first time, a factor technically, and go beyond that to what Matt does such a fine job of highlighting most of the time. And we're talking about competent coaching, competent recruiting and pursuit of these recruits, showing and displaying and being able to prove the proof of concept, getting players to the NFL, and of course, winning championships in college. I have to shake my decades of college football viewing and my hierarchy. I have to shake that loose and get with today's 17-year-old, because to me, USC is here and Oregon is here. And that is certainly, that's not reality in today's college football. And I know that. But when I see the Cardinal and the gold versus these crazy, whacked out, bright neon greens and yellows, there is a discrepancy in regality within the sport, and that certainly still exists, but it just does not exist with the 17 and 18-year-olds.
That is, and I think some of the comments in the chat, and when we've seen these comments in chats really throughout the whole off season, is that these kids they're young enough that they don't remember Pete Carroll. They don't remember the dynasty in the first decade of this century. Well, these players were just too young back then, so there isn't that brand identification that there was with earlier generations of players a decade ago. So USC has to rebuild that brand, and the 2022 season certainly moved things in the right direction, but then not being able to follow that up with a similar or equivalent season in 2023, that definitely allowed all the negative perceptions, all the less than fully favorable narratives to continue. I just want to emphasize one thing, and this plays into my identity as bad cop, but when USC loses a recruit to Dan Lanning in Oregon, should I just kind of say, well, okay, it happened again, it is what it is, it's reality? I think that there has to be a little bit more dissatisfaction expressed about all this, that it's not the USC standard. Now, where I do kind of have a more measured tone is that USC can't change this instantly. Like, USC can't transform its NIL reality. It can't transform its identity in terms of how close it is to a national championship in the off season. Like, these are not instant fix type situations. On those points, I'm sympathetic to USC. Like, you just right now, Oregon's in an ascendant cycle and position, and USC is not. But to kind of stress in my writing that this is not the USC standard, I think that's fair. So if I sound a little bit like Adam Lamparello, I mean that this is where Adam and I are a little bit in sync. I think it kind of needs to be said, even repeated, so that we remind ourselves, let's not get too complacent in terms of accepting this as the new normal, or accepting this as kind of like a permanent, pervasive kind of reality. Like, there should be real frustration. I know it's just one recruit, Cody Green, today, but it is part of a larger context. It is part of a larger situation. And I don't think the acceptance of Oregon being ascendant in recruiting should be digested or absorbed quite so easily. So if it seems like, being negative and harsh, well, it is, but there's a purpose there, right? Because I think that USC being better, USC, restoring itself, reviving itself, there should be some discomfort, right? Things should be a little bit unsettled. People should be a little bit on edge. Like, there should be that antsy, cranky, ornery quality that comes from seeing a rival continue to beat you on the recruiting trail more often than not. And we can say this is 2026, but this is the future, and the future is based on what recruits are seeing in the present moment. USC needs to change this present moment. And again, I've clearly said it has to happen on the football field. So, like, it's not as though it starts with Jen Cohen. I mean, she has a role to play for sure. It starts with getting this 2024 season right. I think we can agree on that. But I think that being a little bit negative, like pouring a little bit of extra vinegar into the pot, there's a purpose there. There's a reason for it. Like, it's not gratuitous. That's probably what I'm trying to say here. I want every USC fan, every USC reader to continue to feel a little bit unsettled when each of these things happen, because there shouldn't be a complacency about it. And I know it's a fine line between complacency and yet understanding that you can't change everything right away. Like, complacency and acceptance, the line can be blurred between those two things, but I think they're finely interwoven together. And I definitely don't want to be Clay Helton, waving pom-poms before success, before restored status has been achieved. And that, like, I think Tim is a little bit more of an optimist than I am. But I certainly want the change to happen, but I'm a little bit more doubting Thomas about it. And I think that's good, actually, because this is talking season. We're getting to the end of it. We're about to see teams play on the field. So, like, teams are going to begin to prove whether they are legitimately good or not. But, talking season and these polls, which we talked about earlier, remind us it's just talk, and the games on the field are what matter. And I think there's nothing wrong with being a little bit poking, prodding. Some will call it clickbait, and if you want to say that, that's fair. But I'm stressing here, there's a purpose to it. Like, I don't want anyone to be satisfied by it. And if there's like an NIL collective director or anyone who's involved in an NIL effort at USC, if they see what we write and they perceive a little bit of negativity, good. Like, this is meant to spur you into a greater sense of urgency. I'm not writing directly for an NIL audience, but I'm just saying, like, I'm writing for a larger USC audience with the mindset of, like, I want people to feel that USC is not where it's supposed to be. And if USC is where it's supposed to be, you can bet that I'm going to yell it from the rooftops, and I'm going to celebrate it, and I'm going to be really glad about it. But until then, yeah, I think there should be a little extra vinegar. There should be a little extra dissatisfaction sprinkled into the pot. So what some people might think is a gratuitous piece of negativity, I think it's, jabbing, spurring, making sure people remain uncomfortable until the expected USC standard of excellence is attained.
How can I possibly follow that up? I will do my best, folks. Comments and questions are welcome in the chat. Of course, we appreciate your super chat contributions. And of course, you have already marked the day and time, Friday, 7 Pacific time, with Matt and with Tim, the big USC call-in show that they provide each and every Friday. And I believe we've got some programming changes to announce concerning that, but we've got a few weeks till the season, so we will certainly let you know about that soon. I will
Mark,
add,
before you continue, and we celebrated this on Friday, but I just want to make note of it again. Happy birthday to Gary from Dana Point, one of our loyal Friday night callers and one of our loyal viewers here at the Voice of College Football. Celebrated his birthday on Friday. Gary, you're an inspiration. You're a legend. We love you. We hope you had a wonderful weekend, and we thank you for being so supportive of the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. I can't tell you, Tim's not here on the show, but I know, like Tim with his dad, and Papa Prangley did call in on Friday night show. Like, seeing the love Tim has for his dad, Tim loves you, Gary, like a second father, and I love you like a second father. My dad did go to USC, in case you didn't know. I've mentioned that once in a blue moon, but like, my dad did go to USC in the 1960s. But like, we love you, Gary, and we think the world of you, and it makes our day whenever you call, whenever you just come in with a comment. Your financial support is amazing, but just you being here, you've spent over half a century watching and following USC football, and you come on to our humble program Monday and Friday here at the Voice of College Football. It's an amazing tribute, and we do this for you and for the other loyal USC fans here on our show. So happy birthday. We hope you had a wonderful celebration over the weekend, Gary.
Yes, I certainly back and support that, Gary. Thank you so much for being here at the Voice of College Football. Your presence is felt in so many different ways, and you are a unique voice here at the Voice of College Football USC. Matt and I recently got together, and we have released all 3 bonus cuts, the choice cuts of USC. Yes, the choicest of cuts. Oh, just so tender and just delectable. So please check them out. Become a YouTube member here at the Voice of College Football USC on the appropriate top 2 tiers to get your bonus segments. I believe we have totaled 16 to date, 3 fresh off the grill. So there you go. So please check them out. When I get together to talk college football with Matt, and of course that's every Monday night, but when we are able to kind of in a more relaxed setting, really expand on a topic, I always come away with a better perspective and more knowledge and information having spoken with Matt for sure. Matt, I will throw this out to extend on your point concerning where this program is headed and that standard of excellence that needs to be in mind. And until it's achieved, hey, we need to be on edge because the goal has yet to be achieved. We have yet to reach our rightful place in college football. This USC team, to me, is a bit of a wild card. And I don't know that that's necessarily going to be reflected in the Big Ten standings because I think that upper tier is extremely strong. The probable top three, certainly the top two, are going to be difficult to unseat. That USC could have an outstanding season, and maybe they are a fourth team from the Big Ten to reach the college football playoff at 10-2, or a down USC from a standings perspective is going to be buffeted by that underbelly of the Big Ten. I can't see them dropping any lower than 6th or 7th in the conference. So they are in a sense, you would think by all probabilities positioned there. But how that is achieved and what it looks like, and that record that could deviate between roughly 10-2 and 7-5, not that they can't beat every team on their schedule, but to surpass a 10-2 record may be a little bit too much to ask. I just think that there's a lot of factors in place. Miller Moss, okay. Dylan Gabriel is the premier quarterback in the conference as we enter the season, but he is not a future NFL star quarterback. He is not of that ilk. He's a really, really accomplished college quarterback. We could get to the conclusion of this season, and Miller Moss could be the best quarterback in the Big Ten. It is possible that he could be considered the best quarterback in the conference by season's end. He could also slip and become the 5th or 6th best quarterback in the conference. I would be surprised, based on Lincoln Riley's tutelage, that he would slip any further than that. The offensive line, which on the first line is strong, depth issues, concerns there. Gets beaten up by teams across the Big Ten defensively. The defensive front, there are some really good individual players led by Bear Alexander, but again, depth concerns and so forth that this team could teeter on. And what I've pointed out in the past, what I consider not to be a gauntlet of a schedule, but just competent team after team after team, that if this team does not play a slew of one-score games, I will be fairly surprised. And with Notre Dame and LSU in the non-conference, you could be looking at the same football team, and based on a missed kick or a muffed punt or a bounce of a ball, could be 2-0 in those two key non-conference games, or 0-2 and pretty much be the same team. It's going to be a narrow path to success, I believe, for USC, but I believe that they have the talent to do it, and certainly a head coach that has accomplished success in winning conference championships. So it's an intriguing team, and I will finish on this note. Again, my favorite Voice of College Football created statistic would be the ±3 quotient from the previous season. And USC has been a component in that the last two seasons. 4-8, 11-1, 7-5. And more than 1/3 of the sport, folks, last season had a ±3 difference in win total from the previous season. Could USC, a 7-5 regular season team last year, jump to 10-2?
I know that you love baseball. I love baseball. And one of the things I always do in terms of preseason baseball predictions, if there was a team the previous year that was like 43-15 in one-run games, I'm immediately selling stock in that team the following season. And it's not that though that team wasn't good, like it's not as though they didn't get a lot of big outs or a lot of clutch hits in the 8th, 9th, 10th innings. But just in baseball, a law of averages game mapped out over 162. Just the odds say you're not going to be ridiculously good in one-run, really close cliffhanger games in consecutive seasons. And the times that I've applied that, it's usually borne out that teams had a lot of regression to the mean after they were wildly successful in one-run games the previous season. So, that can certainly work in USC's favor. That, the Notre Dame game was a blowout. The Washington game was a shootout, but it felt as though Washington was in control most of the way. But you do think, if USC can continue to score mid-30s, low 40s, and then you get what we've been talking about all off season, a defense that isn't, spectacular, but just give me top 40. Give me even top 35. If USC's defense is top 35 in scoring and most of the other basic measurements, and you get, a decent, historically representative Lincoln Riley offense, that's probably going to be a pretty good formula for the Trojans. And I do think that we are going to have a top 40 defense. Again, my main concern is the offensive line. I think that if the offensive line protects Moore Moss, it all comes together. But will that starting offensive line remain healthy? And because when Gino Quinones went down last season, it's not as though he was the pillar of the team, but his presence there was really important. He was a veteran. He was smart. He knew the system. And when he went out, you definitely saw a drop off in overall performance from the offensive line. Of course, Justin Dedich struggling. Some of the other incoming transfers struggling. Tim Prangley, of course, mentioned Ethan White, having to retire from football. So that became a blank. It became a wasted effort in the portal. USC wasn't able to plug a player in with a lot of size and bulk, which White was going to bring to the table. So Gino Quinones, that was an unexpectedly severe domino effect from, a player who was not viewed as an All-American, but just one piece of the puzzle. It showed the frailty of USC's offensive line situation. But if the offensive line does come together, I think that the defensive side of the ball, the defensive portion of this larger formula, it's going to fall into place. But we know that football is an attritional sport. So there are likely to be injuries at some point. And you just hope that they're not to the nerve center level players along that USC offensive line. But to circle back to your larger point, USC was on the wrong side of some small margins last year. Utah was a representative game. Oregon couldn't blow out. Oregon should have been a lot better than just 9 points better than USC. So you think that if USC can make some substantial roster improvements, the ceiling for this team might be higher than a lot of national pundits, the people who are putting USC 23rd in the AP poll. USC's ceiling might be a lot higher than what the national consensus is. So that boomerang factor and your plus or minus 3 quotient could definitely work in USC's favor this season. Absolutely.
As we conclude a 14 playoff, looking forward to, of course, the 12-team playoff here in 2024 and the expanded opportunity that everyone will enjoy and what USC could have done. There's a lot of statistics, obviously, that have come out throughout the offseason in regards to what college football has looked like during the 14 playoff era. And here's a stat I came across the other day, courtesy CFB Home. And so can you imagine, as I will try to sort this out for you, Matt, these are number of top 10 wins that every program in the Power Four have achieved during the 10-year playoff era. And the first 3 or 4 are what you would expect. Alabama 23, Ohio State 22, Georgia 20, and on down the line. LSU at 17. Practically half of those were during the one season of 2019. Maybe there were half there. USC, consider that they defeated over a 10-year span 5 top 10 teams. So the likes of Baylor, Utah, Mississippi State, Stanford as well, Washington within the conference, Oklahoma State, TCU, Michigan State had 9. That number surprised me, even though we know how successful Mark D'Antonio was for a few seasons there at the beginning of the playoff era. For USC to be buried that low for a 10-year period, man, it is time for this program to be resurrected.
And it shows that outside of Sam Darnold riding in on his cape for 1.8 seasons, he wasn't there for the first 3 games of 2016 before Clay Helton finally got religion. But if it wasn't for Sam Darnold riding to the rescue, that number probably would be what, 1, 2? So yeah, it's just shows how damaged a brand USC is. And Lincoln Riley lifted it up in 2022, but then couldn't sustain it in 2023 because he didn't have that depth provided by Clay Helton. Clay Helton did not leave him much. I mean, Clay Helton left him a really good starting offensive line for 2022, but outside of that, not a whole lot. And it was Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison and Travis Dye needing to freshen up that offense. So it really just speaks to how much Clay Helton hollowed out the USC program.
All right, folks, we do appreciate you being here. And of course, you're only 4 days away from having Matt and Tim host another USC call-in show where you make the calls and you produce the show. It is your show on Friday nights. Absolutely. And of course, it's your show tonight as well here on Mondays. And we are guided by your comments and questions all the time. One more time, folks, that YouTube membership here at the Voice of College Football USC with the Choice Cuts with Matt and myself, please dive in. 3 more released here in the last couple of weeks. So please check those out. It's good to see Tim in the chat. Tim, I hope you're getting a little bit of rest and recovering a bit.
Mark, one thing to touch on, because you follow the Big Ten very closely. We know you've covered the Big Ten in the past, for various, on podcasts, various multimedia platforms. Are there particular developments at other Big Ten schools? And of course, we invite everyone watching here at the Voice of College Football to watch your other team-specific shows, Nebraska, Iowa, and elsewhere throughout the network at the Voice of College Football. So you can get like a deeper dive on those individual programs with Mark and the specific hosts he has at those other schools. But are there some broader Big Ten themes, Mark, that you're noticing from camp, from what various other Big Ten commentators for various other team sites are saying? Are there some certain developments either in the top tier of the conference, the middle of the conference, the bottom of the conference, just anything of note for this, for our USC audience, which, is stepping into the Big Ten, might not be as naturally aware of the competition in ways that, every previous August, like we knew what we were getting into in the Pac-12 with, like what a road trip to Corvallis means, what a trip to Boulder means, what a trip to, Berkeley, Palo Alto might mean. But in the Big Ten, it's all kind of new. So just, is there a Big Ten nugget of some kind? It could be from any program, high or low, that you find particularly noteworthy and might be of some interest to a USC audience.
Well, we'll start at the top because, of course, that's where USC would like to be heading and challenging. So we'll go to Ohio State. The offensive line has not been dominant for quite some time. It's been adequate. And, of course, last year was not able to push Michigan out of the way in the run game. But they're pretty well set along the offensive line. There's one position at right tackle that they're trying to figure out, and that seems to be where they're set. Now, whether those players have settled in and developed and have come together as a cohesive unit. It's another thing, but they have seemed to have settled pretty much on an offensive line in Columbus. The other thing to be sorted out, and this is a problem that you have when you've recruited as well as they have at wide receiver, is they're actually looking at like 7 or 8 deep at wide receiver, but it's a very inexperienced wide receiver group, even though it's just insanely talented. And so there's a lot to be sorted out with a lot of very young, inexperienced players. Second leading receiver on the team, Carnell Tate, only had 18 catches last year. So a lot of just guys that have stars plastered all over their helmets from their recruiting rankings. And of course, led by Jeremiah Smith, who was the #1 rated player in the country, regardless of position. But Ohio State, very much at the wide receiver position, trying to sort things out. I asked the question this week on our Ohio State show, is Will Howard, for as much as I admire, and Buckeye fans would join me, as much as I would admire the work put in and the tenure of JT Barrett, I don't think that that's going to be enough. Another JT Barrett in the form of Will Howard is not going to be enough for this team to accomplish its goals. And is Will Howard, with decent, acceptable passing skills and really good running skills, not Michael Vick, Lamar Jackson running skills, but far better than average, like JT Barrett. He reminds me like JT Barrett in many ways. Is that going to be good enough? That's kind of the Ohio State theme. I was at Michigan podcast this past week. Steve Dace has me on most weeks, and I kind of flipped the tables on him and flipped the notion in a number of key areas for Michigan, which have been stout to where there could be some questions this year. Offensive line, defensive line, secondary, those places where Michigan has been rock solid for 3 consecutive years and winning Big Ten championships, where there is just a thread of concern there. And of course, let's also understand the dynamic for Michigan, where think what you will about the NCAA investigation and where Michigan stands there and what the justification is there or lack thereof and what the penalty should be. Let's think just about the football players who are innocent. They handled that situation exceptionally well, with a dark cloud hanging over them, adversity, questions, concerns for the entire back half of the season. Of course, they couldn't have come through any better last year. Now, do they draw from that? This is, again, an issue where we know that this is still hanging over them, and it's supposed to be coming out any day, any week now. But every team, as coaches like to tell us, is a new team, a new dynamic. And with the new field general in Sharon Moore, not Jim Harbaugh, will they handle it as well as the 23 edition? So a lot of things I could unpack, but those are two. And also, the folks, don't chuckle or just flat out bust a gut when I say this. Are there pieces in place at Iowa for them to actually have a competent offense led by Tim Lester as the new offensive coordinator? I believe the answer is yes. Now, at Iowa, that could be an 80th ranked offense, and that would be an enormous improvement.
It's basically the corollary to USC on defense. You know, if USC can just, show something of a pulse on defense, marry that with a Lincoln Riley offense, and at Iowa, you're going to get an elite Kirk Ferentz, Phil Parker defense if you can just be moderately competent. Yeah, absolutely. Like if you give Iowa a B- level quarterback, see how far that can go. Because Iowa has had flunkies. Iowa has flunked at the quarterback spot. And Cade McNamara did make the college football playoff in 2021 at Michigan. So I think that's a very credible assertion. And, it could be. Now, I'm not going to lay a lot of money on this, or any money for that matter, but it could be that, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State all easily make the playoff. And who knows, it could be USC versus Iowa for that 4th and final at-large spot in the Big Ten, and that's going to be interesting. And one thing I'm going to write about Trojans Wire, so for people who are interested in what I'm writing about at Trojans Wire, I'm going to do a kind of a deeper exploration of how the pieces of the puzzle could fit for USC to make the playoff at 9-3. Because 10-2, USC is definitely in. I think it's worth just sitting down, having a conversation about what is the 9-3 formula. And you alluded to this earlier, Mark, in the show here at the Voice of College Football tonight. You said, how it comes together, which teams USC does beat and lose to. I'm definitely gonna sit down for a bit and explore that, because it's not just a flat 9-3, right? The 9 has to have some meat on the bone, and we'll flesh that out in terms of which game or games rather are likely to carry a little bit more importance. You can't guarantee that. Maybe LSU goes 7-5 in that week 1 win might not matter as much, but like all things considered, in terms of probabilities, likelihoods, etc., which games matter a little bit more? How does the needle move in one direction? That's coming up on Tuesday here at Trojans Wire. So if you're watching this show after Tuesday, that'll already be up on the site. So that's coming up this week here at Trojans Wire. Also about Trojans Wire, I want to save the heavy gunpowder for closer to the season. So like the last week of August, we're gonna play some hits, and we're gonna get into some of the spicy takes and some of the really 150-degree topics. In terms of like they're gonna burn your fingers off if you touch them. We're saving the heavy artillery for the final week of August. But generally, as we go deeper into the month, as we get closer in the season, lots of Big Ten forecasts, lots of Big Ten predictions where USC fits in the mix. So that's going to be later in the month. But this week, definitely going to explore the 9-3 playoff question for USC at Trojans Wire.
In the week of the LSU game, certainly we will be here at the Voice of College Football USC, and we, between Matt, Tim, and I, will figure out what exactly that is going to look like and what that means for you. But keep in mind, we will be here for you, and we'll blow up that matchup. And Matt, the 9-3 narrative, I like so much that the other night on our Miami show, when it was stated that, 10-2 will get us to the playoffs, whoa. I threw up my hand. Hang on just a second here. Let's understand 10-2 in the ACC with Miami's schedule is not a guarantee. And you know what? On the fly, I came up with 2 scenarios, one involving Michigan, one involving USC at 9-3, to say this 9-3 is better than your 10-2.
And that brings up one of, gosh, Mark, it already feels like late November with you saying that, because remember, like this was it was either 2011 or 2012, one of those 2 years, I forget which, but there was the Oregon-Stanford debate, and one of them had 1 loss, one of them had 2, but the 2-loss team had the much better strength of schedule, and it brings up that point. And again, why did I say this feels like late November? It's because in late November we have this debate. There is a world of difference. There's a Grand Canyon of difference in college football between a debate involving a 1-loss team and a 2-loss team versus a debate between a 1-loss team and a 0-loss team. Because the 0-loss team did everything in its power. It was perfect. It did not slip up once. You cannot punish that team. That's why the Florida State snub was so awful for the sport on every imaginable level. But when you have a 2-loss team and a 1-loss team, you have 2 teams that did not do everything possible. So they both have blemishes. So they both take on the risks associated with being thrown into a pool for inclusion or being snubbed. So that is a reminder. 1 loss versus 2 loss is a totally different discussion from 1 loss versus unbeaten. Really important to remind everyone of that fact. So if 1 loss versus 2 is a thing, 2 loss versus 3 losses is also a thing. It's fair game to elevate a strong 9-3 over a weak 10-2 if that's what you have in a comparison.
And quickly, Matt, to play off of your USC Iowa comparison, in addition to them just on the field being the complete antithesis of one another, and that being a fascinating matchup, as you pointed out, a comparison of the two in the standings would certainly favor USC with the Notre Dame and LSU games on their schedule. But the larger these conferences get, folks, the more games and matchups that are not played. So 18 teams in the Big Ten, you play 9 conference schedules, therefore you miss 8 teams. You miss 8 teams. Therefore, a greater opportunity or chance that we are sitting here at the end of the season saying, wonder what would have happened if those 2 teams played. We wish those 2 teams could have played. And don't be surprised if those 2 teams this year are Iowa and USC.
And I have a way for college football to address this problem more fully in the 12-team playoff era, but I'm going to wait until we get closer to the season. I'm going to save it for the future.
Love it.
The ultimate teaser, not just until the next segment, but until the next Monday show, or perhaps even 2 weeks from now.
And I have one last ultimate teaser for all of you, because Matt and I have had 16 conversations that are worth the listen. So once again, become a YouTube member right here at the Voice of College Football for the choice cuts with Matt and myself on USC's place in the Big Ten, in college football history, on the national landscape. You will not be disappointed. Appreciate you being here, everyone, at the Voice of College Football. Catch Matt and Tim every day at Trojan's Wire. And, of course, be back here on Friday night at 7 Pacific with Tim and with Matt. Matt, as always, appreciate you being here for us, and you have a great week.
Thank you, and thanks, everybody, for listening. And join Tim and myself Friday, 7 p.m. Pacific. I don't know who's bringing the beer, but I know Adam Lamparello is sponsoring our second hour.